Welcome everybody to our webinar on addressing climate change and energy crisis. I'm Pallavi Banerjee. I take care of the marketing for the Middle East, India and Asia Pacific region. We have with us our speaker for today, Usman Haider, who is the Senior Auditor LRQA. He's the subject matter expert for GHG, climate change and sustainability. With more than 20 years of professional experience, he's an auditor and trainer for various international standards like ISO50001, 14001, 50001, SA8000, and many more. So Usman is a very, very well-known person in the industry in terms of sustainability. Welcome, Usman, to our webinar today. A few housekeeping things before I hand over to Usman. Whatever questions you have during the webinar session, please feel free to put them in the chat window. We will be able to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Today's session will be recorded, so do not worry. If there are some parts that you miss, we will be sending the recording of the session within a week after the webinar. There will be a short survey, just a couple of questions, which will pop up after the webinar. Request you to please fill it in so that we get an idea of what you would like to hear from us in the next webinars. Thank you, and Usman, over to you.
Thanks, Pallavi. And I'm glad to be part of this webinar addressing climate change and energy crisis. This is the overall agenda we have today, starting with the overall global context and importance of ISO 50001 energy management system and ISO 14064, the GHG accounting and reporting standards. We'll discuss about the various aspects in terms of what has been the recent, developments and the activities which also are important, and how the ISO 50001 energy management system and ISO 14064 is, going to be helping the organizations to work on their overall strategies for sustainability, climate change, and net zero emissions also, which also has come up in the recent years. The second point on the agenda is role of ISO 50001, ISO 14064 in responding to climate change and energy crisis. The overview which you will get here will try to have some understanding, awareness about the linkages between how well requirements of these two standards can be understood, and they help you in shaping your overall strategies for climate change and how to address the issues related to energy crisis. Then some time which we are going to spend on framework, how to develop, establish in terms of the requirements of ISO 50001, overall requirements of the energy management system, the overall understanding of the ISO 14064 and what are the expectations from that. Also, we will talk about how these two standards can contribute to decarbonize the overall climate change related aspects as part of your overall strategy. Then little bit of overview of sustainability reporting, what are the linkages, how these two standards can help you in terms of the sustainability reporting as well. As you know, there are various platforms and tools available which organizations are looking for nowadays, which they can demonstrate their overall commitment for sustainability. So that's also another aspect which after implementation of energy management system and ISO 14064, which is the GHG accounting and reporting standards, they will be in a position to better demonstrate their commitments towards the sustainability and decarbonization. In terms of the global context, everybody is aware the various aspects, how climate change is impacting the planet Earth. The global warming, which is also causing the rising temperatures and overall, impact on the North and South Pole, glaciers melting, which is also causing the increase in sea levels, and subsequently impact of these climate change related things how is it is going to impact the overall environments and seasons on different continents, and causing droughts, floods, hurricanes in the previous years, especially if you consider previous decade. This has impacted a lot in various countries. So this is another aspect which is also driving the change and the overall, expectations in terms of the industry, you can say requirements, which also is coming up, and which is pushing towards some actions for the climate change. If we talk about how these impacts of climate change have overall impact on the businesses, I think recent example which we had in few years is the pandemic for COVID-19 also, which has shown what kind of impacts can be there. Similar way, those countries which in recent decades have been impacted by the climate change effects, almost similar to that, you can see disrupted supply chains, the overall rising insurance costs, and labor shortage in certain situations where, let's say the movements are also limited, and then the impacting level of consumer spending end of the day, when the overall, the financial aspects are being impacted due to these aspects which we have discussed, supply chain disruptions and labor challenges. So finally, it impacts on the consumer spending, and end of the day, this has overall impact on the businesses. So these are the different aspects which you will usually see the impact on due to the climate change. There are many others, but the commonly discussed and known aspects, you can say, among many of those, which maybe some of these we may a little bit further discuss today during the further discussions. Here, this gives an overview with a timeline how various developments have been taking place starting in 1985, going through the years and up to 2022. The first key development which happened was in 1985 under IUCN platform, where the some strategy about the overall conservation aspects was developed and it was presented, followed by UN conference on the Montreal 1987, which also introduced the sustainable development related aspects in 1987. Then in 1992, we had the Agenda 21 as part of the ECO 92 at Rio, where the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework on Climate Change, and the Kyoto Protocol requirements were also set up. Further down the years, if you will see, 2005 was one of the key year where Kyoto Protocol became effective, and 2015 then where the Paris Agreement happened, and at the UN General Assembly, the Sustainable Development Goals were presented, and Agenda for 2030 was also set up. And most of the initiatives which you see today, they are actually linked with that Paris Agreement. The most recent developments, as you are aware, have been in 2021 and last year in 2022 also. In 2021 COP26 meeting, which happened at Glasgow, where various commitments were made, and the overall commitment of Paris Agreement was discussed in terms of the long-term temperature goal to limit increase of temperature to 1.5 degrees C, so that you can have the net zero emissions by 2050 with a reduction of 45% by 2030, and then that should help in achieving the net zero by 2050. We will see a few key points of the recent developments further. Here, as you can see, the COP26 meeting overview. This had been a milestone actually after 2015, where more than 140 countries, which makes up more than 90% of the global GDP. There were pledges about net zero emissions at the country levels with the National Climate Action plans to be developed. Excuse me. Then about 100 countries which pledged to reverse deforestation by 2030. Another important aspect was the phase down of the coal-based energy generation, where various countries, especially those among the developing countries, also agreed to phase down the energy generation which is based on coal, because that's one of the major source of the fossil fuel related emissions. Around 34 countries with various banks and financial agencies also had pledged to stop international funding for unabated fossil fuel energy. That's also mostly related to the coal-based and other projects, which there had been some funding. So the pledge was made to stop, or let's say initially to reduce the funding towards such projects. On the transport side also, which is one of the key sector in terms of the transportation related emissions, ISCAC also another forum which also helped in the form of commitments for aviation related decarbonization under the ICO platform. So this was another initiative which also was committed, and this is going to help in reduction of the aviation related emissions. Then another milestone was with the further working, which also in terms of new car sales, 24 developed countries, they agreed to develop such strategies and move ahead towards the new EV related cars, which can help in achieving zero emissions globally by 2040. So these were the key developments under COP26, which are basically putting various further sustainability related strategies and at the various levels on the regulatory body in countries from government side, as well as the overall impact which you will also see in coming years from various financing organizations as well, which will finally be pushing the organizations towards establishing that zero emission targets and the strategies. Another excuse me, recent COP27 meeting, as you are aware, in Egypt 2022 last year, although not big kind of achievements at that platform this time, but few initiatives which have been taking place and some further developments which took place related to, number one, is you see vulnerable countries will be helped with the losses and damages related aspects, where due to climate change they have any impact, and they will be able to get some funding based on the overall fund which will be established. This was one of the aspects, but as we know, this is one of the part of the corrective measures, not as part of the reduction, but just to help those vulnerable countries. Then there was some debate on accelerating the energy transition. Again, the phase down of coal related, but no solid agreement could happen on that. However, there had been certain discussions and talks. Another initiative about Africa, where certain initiatives related to restoration of the degraded land and water management related some funds have been established, and they will be going to be dispersed to these countries to manage their degradation of land, as well as the other water related issues, which can also help them to at least mitigate the impact. Finally, the nature-based solutions also, which were this time first time included in the negotiations at the UN climate initiatives level, and some further discussions and proceedings did happen, but without any final disclosures on that. However, it is expected in the coming years further we can see some developments on this aspect as well. The overall idea here is just to introduce the concept of whatever further developments take place or as part of the mitigation actions, eco-friendly and nature-based solutions should be preferred on that as a first preference, and then other synthetic or other let's say artificial aspects of either the production side in the industry or in other industrial sectors, they should then be at the second preference. Okay, with this background in mind, so we'll now just have a look at the overall impact, which in terms of the energy management and ISO 14064 GHG accounting and reporting, how this can help the organizations in terms of addressing the current aspects and mitigation of the impact. The overall role which both of these standards play important role is the helping in the decisions at the corporate level. So when you are going to establish your strategies for the emission reductions, of course, you are going to look at your overall available opportunities and the risks and overall process of supporting the initiatives, how you can mitigate those risks in the form of various investments which may be required. Then the overall initiatives which you may participate at different platforms, for example, GHG registries, sustainability reporting related initiatives, for example, GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, is one of the initiatives which various organizations at the corporate level also do adopt, and they do report following the GRI protocols and disclosures in terms of the annual sustainability reporting. So these are the aspects where these two standards can be really helpful. As you see, the overall contribution of the energy related consumptions is more than 60% at world emissions level. So this is one of the major proportion where if organizations take some steps in development of such systems for energy and emissions, so this is one area which can help them to improve on a major proportion of the emissions. And both these things are actually interlinked with each other. Any initiative which you take for ISO 50001 energy side is going to help you on the environmental management ISO 14064 as well, because any conservation of energy or energy efficiency improvement related any projects, if you do any initiative you take up, so the same amount of energy which otherwise in otherwise scenario you are going to consume for your processes and business related activities is not going to be generated. Energy generation, as you know, is mainly through the fossil fuels burning and either in the form of various fuel oils or natural gas. All of these have certain emission levels depending on the type of the fuel and type of the energy which you have. In addressing these issues and challenges, as you can see, the one of the important aspects which organizations also adopting is the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals under the United Nations 2030 agenda, and there are various SDGs also which are part of these 17 goals. One of them is on the energy consumption and reducing the energy consumptions, as well as on the emissions reduction. So the benefit of going ahead with the these two standards also includes the overall achievement of those development goals as well. Further, whenever you have any initiatives where either through the energy conservation or through efficiency improvement of your processes, basically you are going to reduce the costs. So overall cost per production of per unit also is going to be reduced, and in turn further it will help you to reduce your carbon footprint of the product. This is another concept which is also developing, and more awareness also now organizations are having, and then moving towards the carbon footprint of the product or service. So better efficiency and energy conservation is going to help on not only the cost reduction, but also help you to reduce your carbon footprint of the products and services. Overall decarbonization, if we talk about, with the monitoring and reporting, you will be in a position to know where, at what level you are standing right now, and that way it will help in the decision making, because it is not possible to eliminate, or let's say fully reduce your emissions to the zero level, but at least you can have some shift from higher emission levels to the lower emission levels, and then continue on improving with time. So while you are on this strategy to make a shift from high emissions to excuse me, on a shift, while you are having some initiatives to reduce your emissions, you will also get an opportunity to offer new products, which also through some substitutions of materials or through some other efforts of such materials which can help in reducing the emissions, can also be one of the good strategy in terms of the reducing emissions. And the overall carbon offsets is the last option, you can say, where whatever remaining part of your emissions out of the total through your projects, if in case you are not able to reduce further, so you have some offsets being achieved through the carbon emissions trading schemes, which are there at the global level at different countries as well. So you are going to have some investments to reduce emissions by those projects, and then that's the way you will be on the shift for the decarbonization strategy and to achieve the net zero emissions. Now, little bit of the overall framework we'll just see for the ISO 50001 energy management system, and then same way for the ISO 14064. What does it present as a framework in terms of the requirements of the standard? It's quite well aligned now with the requirements of other standards and the overall Annex SL structure, which other ISO standards are also following now. As you are aware, the other standards like ISO 9001, 14001 also follow the Annex SL structure, high-level structure, where the overall process of identifying internal, external issues, needs, and expectations of the interested parties, then the identification of risks, and finally actions to mitigate the risks and to utilize the opportunities. So the same overall framework is adopted here for energy as well, where you look at your current energy types, your past as well as the current energy uses, and then you work on your energy review process, where you determine your significant energy user areas, relevant variables, and the overall current energy performance, and then you determine and prioritize your opportunities where you can work on, and then you improve your energy performance. As an output, so you'll be able to have some data also generated for your different equipments and processes, which can also be analyzed, and then further you can have the decision making based on the factual data. So while going through this process, you determine significant energy use areas, and then you establish your objectives, targets, and energy performance indicators. Also, you compare with the energy baselines, which depending on the availability of data, you will be going to decide which year in the past you have the enough data as well available, which can be compared with the actual performance, and then you can have a meaningful and logical comparison in terms of the actual achievements. And another important point here is on the data collection plan, because a lot of data will need to be collected as part of the implementation of the standard, and unless you have good monitoring and measurement and data collection, you cannot get the all benefits of implementation. So same typical process in terms of planning your energy related aspects, implementing them, and then you get the improvements on the energy performance side. This is another way just to reflect on that in few simple steps, as you see. So I don't think I need to go in detail. We have already discussed on these aspects. The overall process steps which you follow in terms of determining the risks and the significant energy use areas, then addressing those risks with the help of the objectives and energy performance indicators. Step 5 and 6, same way, identifying the SEUs. Then you have your reviews against the baseline after implementing those measures to monitor and report the overall energy performance in terms of the performance for each and every individual significant energy user, and the comparison with the baseline also, which helps you in further improvements and to measure your performance against your past. All right. So what are the expectations from the energy management system implementation? Some of these points we have discussed, but just to quickly reiterate the same, this is one of the key framework which helps you to demonstrate your commitments towards the energy performance improvement and efficiency improvement. And as we discussed, this also helps you in quantitative data gathering, analysis of such data, which will help you to set the targets. And based on this review and studies, you will also be able to identify such quick wins or small, actions in terms of improving your energy performance, apart from the overall strategic objectives, which will of course be there as part of the outcome of the implementation of this standard. And end of the day, as we discussed, once you have the overall conservation of energy and you are able to save on those areas where you have inefficiencies, so that basically helps you to be more competitive, so you can offer better product or service for your customers through implementation of the management system. Okay, so what do we have on the offering in terms of the various standards available and how they interact with each other? As we have seen, the ISO 14064 and 50000 energy management, these standards, as I said, have interlinkages with each other. Whatever efforts you do in terms of energy is going to reflect on the overall GHG emissions as well. So in terms of ISO standards for GHG accounting and reporting, we have ISO 14064-1, ISO 14064-2, and ISO 14067. ISO 14064-1 is basically at the organization level, which helps you in terms of requirements for design and development of GHG inventories, and after development and implementation of the methodologies which you will develop, you will be in a position to work on those areas and improve your performance on the GHGs at the organization level. The ISO 14064-2 is going to help you on the project level. This is for a specific project. When with regard to the requirements of this standard, you are going to take up some project which either may be, let's say, some renewable energy project or some other similar projects like solar energy, wind energy. So wherever you implement some projects, end of the day, you are able to trade those emissions, but you need to have some recognition or the verification of whatever quantities of emissions you have reduced as part of implementation of the project, and that basically helps you in terms of the project level GHG accounting and reporting. Then third one, ISO 14067, is basically at a product or service level, where let's say you want to monitor and report and then demonstrate your commitment in terms of the reduction as part of your product life cycle. For example, what is the emission level or what is your carbon footprint based on the product or service. All three of these finally will give you an opportunity to come up with some inventories, which once verified by the third-party verifier in the form of a GHG statement or GHG inventory will give you recognition, and in our language we call it as a GHG assurance statement, similar to ISO certificate, however a little bit different in terms of the overall certification process, which you people will be aware of. Like on the ISO side, mostly the other standards, we have 3-year certification. Here it depends on the period which you are going to choose as an organization's decision. For example, if 1 year is the usual period chosen, so the overall monitoring and reporting you do for 1 year, and then you go ahead with the verification of those GHG inventories, and then you get it verified by the third party, and the output is going to be the GHG assurance statement. ISO 14064-3 is the standard which helps the and guides the validation and verification bodies like LRQA while we are verifying and validating the GHG emission related reports and statements, which you may have followed any one of these criteria which we see above, either CFP, the 14064, or also 14064-1 or -2. So this is the overall available kind of mechanisms or standards which we have in terms of the ISO 14064. So what's the overall framework, similar to like we have seen for energy management system? So what's the framework of ISO 14064, and what does it focus mainly? Here the overall concept is that let us not only focus on the carbon dioxide, but all the GHGs, all the greenhouse gases. No doubt, end of the day, in terms of the CO2 equivalent, when you are going to report, whatever impact because of these other GHGs and gases also happens, you are going to report as a CO2 equivalent, but the aim should be to work on and to reduce all the 6 commonly known GHGs, like we have N2O, methane, CH4, PCFCs, PFCs, and HFCs. There are many refrigerant gases also which have quite higher global warming potential, and they are also quite important in terms of the reducing your overall impact on the environment and to work on the climate change. So you should be working on all possible reduction of these GHGs by defining your timeline as part of your strategy for net zero emissions. There are 3 commonly known scope types when it comes to the GHG accounting and reporting. As you see here, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Mainly, these are based on the types of emission sources or the fuels which are there. For example, in scope 1, mainly these are the direct emissions by burning of fossil fuels. Whatever emissions you are having, that comes under scope 1. And the indirect emissions come under scope 2, which is mainly electricity related, like some electricity or energy which you utilize, which is provided by some utility companies or other companies. Finally, the scope 3, which is also another type of indirect emission, but this is other than electricity. Now, in the new standard of ISO 14064, which is 2018 version, there have been further subcategories in scope 3 as well, where they have listed down and they have given guidance as well on how to monitor and report on the other different types of scope 3 related emissions as well. As we discussed earlier, by monitoring and reporting these GHGs, basically you are going to reduce your emissions, and the rest part of it you are going to offset. And that's the overall strategy which organizations work on. What are the key principles in terms of the monitoring and reporting which are followed? So relevance, completeness, consistency, accuracy, and transparency. So whatever initiatives and actions you are going to take place, these should be kept in mind, and your working should be to improve on the transparency and accuracy at the end of the day. And in a consistent manner, you should be reporting. We'll see in further slides how further these principles help you to achieve your overall aim and objectives. Here another reflection in terms of the overall process steps. So there are two type of boundaries which we follow in terms of the scope: organizational boundaries and the operational boundaries. And remember, this is for the ISO 14064-1, which is for the organization level reporting. At an organization level, for example, if one business may have different facilities in different locations, having different types of businesses, different nature of businesses, so you can take it to a facility level, where within one facility you may have more than one sources of emissions, and then another facility, number two, for example, you may have some other types of emission sources. So you are going to identify the GHG emission sources in each of the facility based on your decision what approach you are going to follow, whether it's operational boundaries approach or if it is equity based. If you have direct control on the operations and activities, so then you are going to follow the operational boundaries approach. If you have some certain share and based on equity also you can follow. So where you don't have operational controls, if certain investments are there, that's where you are going to come with the equity approach. But majority of the organizations, to whatever level they have the direct control, they are going to choose the operational boundaries approach. And following that, in each of the facility, you identify the emission sources, then you select the quantification methodologies, or you are going to quantify the data related to each and every emission source. Then collection of the activity level data, selection of the emission factors for each of that GHG or emission source which you have, and finally you will be going to calculate the GHG emission and inventories as per your methodology which you have established. And as part of development of this framework, you are going to also establish the overall baseline, which may be of any one of these types, fixed or rolling, similar to ISO 50001 also, where we have the baseline concept. So here as well we have got the baseline concept, where you will be going to choose the year which you find that you have enough data and information available, and that information can be compared and is representative of your overall performance. So based on that choice of your baseline year, then you are going to compare your actual achievements and actual data with that baseline. And finally, you are going to have a reporting and verification process, which will result in your overall recognition and the overall statement of the GHG inventories. So this is the overall framework which is followed for the ISO 14064, as I just referred to the organizational boundary approach along with the operational boundaries here. So operational boundaries are going to be within each of these facilities or each of these locations which you will be having within your scope. And then at an organization level, you are going to report based on the combined inventories from each of the facility as per your scope which you have gone ahead with. So this is the overall framework for the ISO 14064. Similar to the previous one, as we see, these are the 5 different steps which you go ahead with. And as we discussed earlier, the following the principles of 14064, you make sure that you are able to finally reach a level where some CO2 equivalent you are going to monitor and report, and then you are going to assess the impact of your activities and your overall emissions which you have as part of this climate change. And number 3, you are going to have the certain targets to achieve your net zero emissions, looking at your overall strategies, and you develop your capabilities. Further, you improve understanding of your people, and you engage your people, different stakeholders. You engage them to ensure that you'll be able to achieve your overall aim of the emission reductions and the decarbonization. The net zero approach, again, another reflection in terms of what may be the priorities. Of course, first option is going to be wherever possible, through improvement of your product or surface life cycle, you can eliminate some GHGs if that is possible, is supposed to be the first preference. Then wherever there is some possibility to reduce the emissions, if not possible to eliminate, so with adoption of the framework at the GHG accounting level and at the energy level, you are going to have some efforts to reduce your emissions. Wherever there is any possibility for substitution, so let's say you have some more carbon emission intensive activity or some source which can be substituted with some other different technology and some other approach which also can help you to reduce your impact and emissions. That's another possibility. Finally, whatever you are not able to further reduce, so you are going to neutralize or offset with let's say some other emissions reduction related, energy efficiency improvement related projects which you can do out of your organizational boundaries, and getting onto some certain platforms or helping other organizations to implement such projects. So that quantity of the emission, then you can demonstrate your commitment that you have reduced in some other project, which also then finally be counted towards your net zero emissions. So the offset is the last option, starting with elimination, reduction, substitution, and then to the offset. So this is the overall approach which organizations go ahead in terms of the net zero achievement. All right. So what are those other reporting related, let's say, initiatives or platforms available apart from the ISO 14064 and energy? Part 1, Part 2 for 14064 we discussed already. The CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project Reporting, the GHG Protocol standard, these are other standards which are also available for the organizations to work on. And GRI, as we discussed earlier, Global Reporting Initiative also for the sustainability reporting. So these can be your next steps in terms of the overall sustainability reporting and for the net zero emissions. Starting with the energy management system, let's say, development of some framework, then the ISO 14064, which is GHG accounting and reporting, and then the CDP GHG protocol. Some organizations, find themselves quite comfortable in terms of understanding and interpreting the requirements through GHG protocol, which is quite clear and with some guidelines. So we have many clients who prefer GHG protocol in comparison to ISO 14064, which is also equally important and good. Recognition is also there in the market, but of course this is purely your organization's decision. But of course this decision is also usually influenced by your stakeholders. Let's say the financing organizations or your clients or other stakeholders. They also influence they influence your decision making, which particular framework you are going ahead to implement. The role of the verification body and what's the overall process which usually we follow in terms of let's say steps. So as you see, the overall aim is whatever efforts you are going to do, so you want the credibility for those efforts and initiatives. So that's where LRQA helps you in terms of your sustainability requirements. So whatever either annual sustainability report, GHG statement, or any of your such efforts which you have done can get recognition with the verification by the independent verifier. It's a two-step approach, stage 1, stage 2 approach. Stage 1 is usually overall strategic level review, which identifies the risks, and we prepare an action plan which will be followed at stage 2. Then the overall verification process is done in stage 2, where it's a detailed verification, and then we review the overall processes and implementation of the system, and that finally results into the verification statement or the assurance statement, which is issued after the independent technical review. What should be the further considerations, especially for the 14064? As you see here, these are further questions which you people may also come across when you will start working, and then you go ahead with the verification step after development of the framework. As I said earlier, choice will depend on your stakeholders, how they influence what is the organization's decision, and who is the intended user of your assurance report. Then we have two types: limited and reasonable assurance. Limited assurance mainly focuses on the overall summarized data review, summaries of the emissions and inventories. However, reasonable assurance is more detailed approach, where we even go to the activity level data also and we review, and it involves more time in terms of the verification. But both approaches are being adopted by the organization. Some organizations initially they find themselves comfortable in terms of limited assurance, and then in later years they go for reasonable, and some directly go for reasonable. In terms of the overall boundaries, already we have discussed. Scope also, usually organizations consider CO2, methane, and N2O, and some particular refrigerant gases also they consider. So all possible, depending on your nature of activities and business, you can choose those GHGs which you are going to report. So somehow there is a flexibility available over there. So I think after you have done the development of the system and gone ahead, there is a, other than stage 1, stage 2 approach, which is part of the verification process. You also can have some gap analysis before you go ahead with the certification process, which also helps you in terms of letting you know against the requirements of the standard and framework what can be further done, what are those gaps which you need to address before you go ahead with the full-fledged certification process. And there are different trainings also available which you can opt for. In case there are any requirements, you can always get in touch with LRQA. All right, so I think time for the overall questions and anything which you may have. I'll ask Pallavi also. We'll take just a quick pause here, and then we will be ready to answer any of your questions.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Usman. Thank you so much. That was a mind-blowing, informative session. I'm sure all our audiences feel similar way. We have a lot of questions. I can see a great deal of questions coming in. I'm sending your way, Usman, so if you could just pause your screen here and quickly have a look at the questions, that would be great.
All right. So one of the question is, can you clarify what is CFP? So it's basically full form is carbon footprint of products or service following ISO 14067, which is the standard based on the life cycle analysis. So you come up with the carbon footprint studies report, and then we do verify and do assurance, and that helps you to demonstrate your commitment that what is the overall level of, let's say, emissions in terms of the product or service which you are offering. One question, scope 3 is very tough to measure. Do you have a simplified model or template to measure? Yes, in terms of the new requirements or new categories which we have in scope 3 now under ISO 14064, They have tried their best to segregate different types of GHGs in categories. There's no set template on those, but what we have seen as a practice from our clients is they sometimes use some tool developed at their own organization level in the form of a simple Excel tool itself can also help for each of the type, each of the category, or they are working on with some consultation or with some help from some other parties also. That's the only way. LRQA actually on that particular part, with being part of the consultancy kind of arrangement, cannot work on those things, cannot help because as a part of our impartiality as well, we are only limited to providing you with the third-party independent verification process. So you are going to rely on your efforts, which you will have in terms of developing the tools and various monitoring related tools. However, in terms of the possible available tools, which I can say GHG protocol, if you go to GHG protocol website, gives you some tools which are also mainly Excel sheet based tools, and there you will find some simpler models and tools available which can also be used in terms of the data collection and monitoring. One question: how do you determine is the scope direct or indirect? So as I said, the standard, once you will buy the standard, is also available with the guideline, which helps you to determine direct and indirect emissions. I think your question is on the direct and indirect emissions, if I understand correctly, not related to operational or organizational boundaries. So considering direct and indirect emissions, it's quite simple. Direct emissions are those which are directly being, the GHG is being released when you are going to burn your fossil fuels. And indirect is something which it's not under your direct control. For example, we had one example of electricity. So electricity is being generated by someone else, and you are buying electricity, and your using electricity consumption is there. So that is an example of indirect emissions. So as a thumb rule, you can say that something which is in your direct control. So you are utilizing something, you are burning a fossil fuel, and on the other side, which some other type of energy which you are getting in. Another question: GHG methodology, emission factors, and calculation. Is there any accredited model? No, the answer is no. There is no such model available on this, but client has to decide, and they need to, develop their methodologies. No doubt, emission factors in many of the areas and sectors based on the industry, emission factors are available for the emission sources at international level as well as at the national level. Also, there are emission factors being calculated depending on your emission type of emission source. You are going to choose the emission factor. Another question is GHG reporting specific to GRI standards. I can't understand your question fully, but if it is something you mean to say that is GHG reporting going to help you in demonstrating and disclosure of your information on the GRI, then yes. As I said earlier, GRI also, there are some standards related to emissions. So when you have implemented ISO 14064 GHG accounting and reporting framework, of course, whatever outcome of that comes into, that will be making it easier for you to make that disclosure on GRI. So more than, let's say, 90% of the work will already be achieved, then you are just going to put it in the GRI format or template, and then you are going to report it. Another question here. Somebody is asking any softwares. There may be some softwares available in the market, but being on this kind of platform, I'm sorry, cannot recommend or make any recommendation on that. All right. Another question is ISO 14064 certificate issued with the UCAS accreditation. The answer is yes. LRQA has accreditation for ISO 14064. So as part of the verification process, when you are going to receive the certificate, it's going to be an accredited certificate. Yeah. So while making a choice for the verification body, this is another aspect which you should look into, whether the verification body you are going ahead has accreditation or not. Another question on GRI and ISO 14064, the competing framework. No, I will not say that it's a competing framework. Rather, I will say these are going to complement each other. And as I said earlier, I'm answering another question. ISO 14064 framework once established, so your job for relevant GRI disclosures related to emissions, GHG, and energy are going to be already done. So your job is done once 14064 outcome is there in the form of GHG assurance statement. So that's going to be very well complementing, and it's only the next effort is going to put it in the GRI disclosure and report it. There's nothing like competing or competition. Another question, how to know that our company has identified risks and opportunities for both standards, ISO 50001 and ISO 14064-1. So very good question. This will be possible once you have done your framework and establish your methodologies as well. When you do your internal audits of the developed management system and you go ahead with the implementation stage, I will say, then you will have better confidence that yes, you have identified and built in those models and requirements based on your risks and opportunities, which as part of your nature of your business you may come across. So the steps are like you create an understanding and awareness among your people. You develop frameworks following the requirements of these two standards, and as part of the framework itself, you are going to identify and manage those risks and opportunities available. And once you go through the implementation, usually it is recommended like 6 months to 1 year of implementation period, internal audits of your management system. And once you are able to have data for at least 6 months or 1 year, and then you will be in a position to understand what are the variables also which are impacting, and to what level you were good in identifying your risks. And as you know, this is also linked with your strategy, overall strategic objectives of the organization. So that's the way forward. One last question, how do I start to measure carbon footprint of my products? So the first step, of course, is, as I said earlier, to have awareness and understanding of the requirements of ISO 14067, let's say, and then development of your management system, and finally, implementing the framework. Going forward, when you will implement the framework, so various tools you are going to adopt, which you are going to collect enough data, measure that data, monitor it, and then you will have the opportunity to find the carbon footprint of your product. But as a first step, of course, is to have understanding and awareness of the requirements and then develop a framework. As a process for ISO certification, one question which we have, what is the process? We attend an online course, and do we need to complete a project work or an online exam? Depends on if you are attending some such course or some training which has some exam. Of course, that helps you to understand to what level of understanding you have, and that can of course be helpful. As I said earlier, there are various training courses available related to understanding of the framework as well as auditing, because we said the internal auditing process of the management system is going to let you know to what level you have got some good system established. So yes, there are various types of courses and trainings which you can adopt, and they can be really helpful for you. Yeah. So Pallavi, do you think we take up the last question, or we should conclude?
Yeah, Usman, I was just going to ping you. I think we are already over time, so I'm sorry, but yeah, we need to conclude now. There's no more time for questions. So let me conclude the session if that's okay.
Yeah, please, you can go ahead. From my side, thanks a lot for all the arrangements, and hope this will help the organizations to understand the overall aspects of 14064 and the energy management system on their journey towards the net zero emissions and improving the energy performance. Yeah.
Thank you, Usman. Thank you so much for this great session. As I said, I'm sure all our attendees will be taking with them some great insights from the session today. So thanks again. Thank you everybody for attending our session today. It was wonderful to have you with us. Quick reminder on the survey which will come after the webinar, please do fill it in. And if you need any assistance in implementing these standards, any queries that you have, you can always reach out to us. We're always available. You know our website, LRQA.com. Our inquiries email is inquiries.ae@lrqa.com from whichever country you're dialing in. So thank you so much again for everybody who joined us today. Have a great day, great evening. Bye-bye.